What's up guys, it's Luke, bringing you a little bit of a different video this time around. We're going to be going over how I won $25,000 on Draftkings Golf DFS for a large field GPP tournament. I've had my fair share of wins over my DFS career. I've won 100K in an NBA GPP, that being my first ever big win and my biggest win to this day. 50,000 for second place in a large field GPP. I've had a couple smaller wins in golf, 5,000, 10,000. But my crown jewel as of this point with my golf DFS career is my $25,000 win at the Mayakoba Classic. That was in the typical $5 GPP 150 max tournament, Drive the Green. You guys have probably seen it plenty of times by now. I won that tournament that week. If you guys remember, Viktor Hovland ended up taking down the Mayakoba Classic. He ends up being one of my favorite players to this day for that point. But yeah, it's my crowning achievement to this day. And in this video, we're going to be covering my winning lineup that helped me take down that contest, some of my thought that went into that, some of the game theory, some of the strategies that I use in every golf tournament up until this day. We're also going to be taking a look at my preparation, some of the research that went into it, and some of the methodology that I use when creating lineups in every single golf tournament, not even just for the Mayakoba Classic. So for the winning lineup, like I said before, I was entered into the $5 GPP contest. And on a typical week for the PGA Tour, I do max enter that contest. I also enter a few other single entries as well, typically right around $200 in entries for those. And my goal with my main lineups is just to cash. In those single entry contests, I'm looking to finish in that top 25, top 30%, and build my bankroll week to week. In terms of my GPP strategy though, it is a lot different. In my GPPs, I'm looking for high upside, high risk plays. I'm not really looking to cash week to week. I understand that I'm going to be losing a lot more than I'm winning in that kind of a high risk, volatile setting, but I'm looking to win a GPP once or twice a year. If I can do that, I'm going to be extremely profitable with my lineups, and that's exactly my goal with these contests. If we take a look at my winning lineup, you can see that volatility was definitely in action. My highest owned player was Viktor Hovland at just over 14% ownership. And while that's not a sleeper pick by any means, he was in that high 9K salary range. Players like Justin Thomas, Abraham Answer, Daniel Berger were all in the 20, even 30% owned range. So he definitely wasn't chalk. I was taking a little bit of a gamble going towards Hovland. And now, honestly, if you see Hovland at 14% ownership, I think a lot of you would be mind blown. He's somebody who's very consistently in that 25, 30% owned range because he's just that good of a golfer. So if we take a look at the options that I liked that week, he came in the lowest owned. He gave me the most leverage on the field. So he was somebody that I went well over the field on. I had him in 58 of my 150 lineups. And to show you guys exactly why I loved him so much, we can just take a look at my blog for that week. So early on in my golf career, I had a written blog for every golf tournament. I went over the course, some of my favorite plays for the week. I was still doing my numerical analysis at that point, running a lot of correlation models, running shots gained, custom models as well. But a lot of it was for my own benefit. It wasn't until COVID, till I had a lot of extra time where I kind of sat down and was like, wouldn't it be cool to share this with other people? So I started a written blog. Pretty much nobody read it. Nobody was looking at it. It really didn't faze me at all. I was kind of doing it just to get some practice, eventually to be doing, videos like this eventually, right? So if we take a look at my blog and what I said about Viktor Hovland, Hovland was the winner of the 2019 Puerto Rico Open. He excels in tropical-like conditions. He has one of the straightest golf balls on tour. It can hit his shots with pinpoint precision. Hovland is also an excellent sand player as well. I expect Hovland to go a little bit overlooked this week, and I'll be buying back in on the young gun before he pops back up and is a surefire play every single week. So what did he do that week? He came out, he won the golf tournament. He has been chalk every single week since then. So this is before that great run of play before. Now he's a bona fide superstar at this point. I was extremely bullish on Viktor Hovland because of his ball striking ability. He was somebody who was one of the best drivers off the tee at that point. He was gaining almost half a stroke per round. He was also one of the best iron players. While his around the green game wasn't the best by any means, he wasn't the best putter at that point by any means. Those kind of players can figure out their short game, and if they do, they become superstars like Hovland has become. And again, at 14%, in a weak field, that is unimaginable for Viktor Hovland now. As a general rule of thumb, I am much more willing to buy in early on guys like Hovland than other players. I'm much more willing to go to that potential early because of the immense upside you get if he ends up paying it off. Like I mentioned, he's relatively 25 to even 30% owned in contests these days. And to find them at that low ownership number, that was a once in a lifetime type opportunity. If you guys don't buy in on players early enough, you're never going to get that opportunity. You're never going to get that payoff like I was able to at the Mayakoba. So you kind of have to risk it to be able to get the kind of upside, but I definitely recommend you guys do so. Now that we had the winner in 58 of our 150 lineups, the key was to get the rest of the 5 roster positions right. And the next key to that was Billy Horschel and coming in at really low ownership and giving us tons of leverage in that 9K range. That week, he almost got into that 9K range. I believe it was like 8,900 or something like that, 8,800 at the very least. And the course demanded accuracy, and that's something that Billy Horschel has. Obviously, he's not one of the longer players on the PGA Tour. He does it with his accuracy, but he was also somebody that was really good on past palm greens. And at the Mayakoba Classic, we had past palm greens, one of the more rare surfaces that we see on the PGA Tour, but it really does benefit people that are aggressive with their putter. And if there's anyone that's an aggressive putter, it's Billy Horschel. You're not going to see him leave many putts short, if any, over a round. And while he wasn't a core play for me by any means, he wasn't somebody that I was extremely bullish about. Again, he's not super long. He's somebody who wasn't the best in wind historically. But he was somebody who was coming in 5 to 10% owned. And when you're in that high 8K range, even that 9K range, coming in at single digit ownership is a really big deal. Those are by far the most chalky ranges in terms of ownership on any DraftKings slate. Typically you're looking at an average, let's say 18 to even 19% ownership. You have guys that go well above that. Obviously, guys that come well below that in that single digit ownership range. And because of that, those guys become extremely, extremely useful. Getting a guy right in that single digit ownership just gives you a ton of leverage. Like I said, you only have to compete with only a single digit percentage of the field to win a GPP. And that week, Billy Horschel was that guy. So that decision didn't happen until Wednesday night when I was actually building my lineups. So to give you guys some transparency on how this process works. Again, he was somebody who during the week wasn't really impressive to me. He was kind of just there in that high 8K range. But when I was building my lineups and I saw that he was going to be rejected, only 6.5% owned, he ended up being a little bit more owned than what I projected. I just wanted to jump all over it. He's a guy who has a pedigree much better than a lot of the guys that were priced around him. The people that were in that mid 8K range or even the high 9K range were people that were coming in with really good recent form. Billy Horschel hadn't really shown much, just a couple, mid 20th place finishes. But he had a higher pedigree than everyone else. So I kind of bought in on that long-term form. And on Wednesday decided to play 15. I believe it was, 15% of him in my lineup. So in short, I could do a whole video on this, and I plan to at some point. But ownership can almost be more important than when it comes to a player's projected points or even their upside. To give you guys just the quick rundown, again, I'm going to do a video on this at some point when it comes to ownership. But a quick way to get your head around this is, the less owned a player is, the more valuable they're going to be. If you consider a player that's owned in 40% of lineups that ends up in going out and crushing it, that sounds great. Obviously, in hindsight, you're going to want to play somebody that goes out and crushes it no matter their ownership. But even if it ends up going well, now you have to compete with 40% of the field with just 5 of the other spots. It's a lot harder to be unique. Even if you end up winning first place, your expected value goes well down because now you're sharing first and second place prize money, or even more so if there ends up being like 20, 30 people tied for first. And that's why, fading chalk is really advantageous. If we take a look at another counterexample, something on the other side of the table, let's say somebody's like 2% owned, they go out and they're the optimal play on any given slate. That's actually what happened in this lineup. We're going to get to that with the last person in this lineup. But if that happens, you unlock, the keys to the mansion at that point. You're only dealing with 1 to 2% of lineups that can actually beat you. You don't have to be that unique in all the other spots if that ends up happening. I know those are 2 drastic examples, one end of the spectrum and then on the other, but that's the easiest way to get your head around it. So ownership becomes almost as valuable as someone's projection, and that's what happened with Billy Horschel that week. So next up was Brendan Todd and Emiliano Grillo. They were standouts at the Mayakoba in the past. They had both finished top 10 before. Brendan Todd was actually coming off a win the year prior, so this is something else that DFS players tend to do a lot. They tend to, the guy who won last year, they tend to give him no chance the next time around. They tend to think that the media pressure, maybe the pressure to perform well again is just too much. But in reality, that really shouldn't be a factor in your analysis at all. They could have a lot of familiarity on the course. They could end up playing better on it because they have that confidence. Or, of course, you could be right and they could end up failing under that pressure as well. in either circumstance, how the hell are you going to know what's going to happen, right? How are you going to try and incorporate that into your analysis? So in this type of spot, you're really implementing a mental block at that point. You don't want to be changing your analysis. And while he didn't win that week, he ended up finishing tied for 8th, ended up posting a ton of birdies, over 100 fantasy points, and really got the job done. He was by far an optimal play. The same thing could be said for Emiliano Grillo. He's somebody who didn't win the Mayakoba before, but he had a few top 10 finishes. He was somebody who was coming in with relatively good form as well. Also one of the people I wrote up that week. This is what I said of Grillo, word for word. Grillo's game suits him perfectly at the Mayakoba Classic. He's very accurate off the tee. He has an excellent iron game as well. Has done well in the past at other comp courses like the Mayakoba Classic, and he has the weak short game made up for with the easy resort style at Camilleon. On top of the course fit, Grillo enters with a top 25 finish in 4 of his last 5 events. So as you guys can see right there, I really didn't try to overthink it. He was somebody who fit the course, was coming in with good form, and I played him in a good amount of my lineups as a result. For Todd, I was 3 times the field in my exposure. I was around 25%. With Grillo, I was around 35% as well, so almost 3 times the field. I feel like that's a really good number in terms of leverage. It gives you enough of your lineups where if you actually hit on those players, you're going to have enough permutations to win a GPP, but it also doesn't go crazy over the field. Not 40-50% of your lineups where if you get them wrong, you're losing $300-$400 of your lineups. Now, getting to the last part of this, looking, kind of taking analysis, kind of taking a step back, taking a look at these two. As I've gotten more and more experience in DFS, I've tried to remove more and more bias out of my analysis. A lot of this is implicit. You don't really notice that the bias is happening. So that's why I try to rely on the numbers and try to just let the models do the thinking for me. As you get more experience in DFS, though, you actually start to implement even more bias into some of your statistics as well. So I've noticed that a lot of the times, I won't see myself playing the guys that won the week before or won the golf tournament the year before. Early on in my analysis, it was something I was really good at keeping out. But the more and more you play DFS, the more and more you fall victim to these traps. A good way to explain this is almost like with a golfer, with Patrick Harrington said about experience. He said, like, when you're new on tour, you kind of don't have that scar tissue. When you go out and you're in contention, you can play freely. You've never had the experience of blowing a lead or feeling that pressure on the last few holes of a golf tournament. Whereas somebody that has that pressure has all that scar tissue. Patrick Harrington was quoted as saying, you've lost your innocence. You go out there, you're freaking out. You know the reality. You know how hard it really is to win on the PGA Tour. You know the weight of that moment, of that instance. And that can definitely be said for DFS players. The more that you get into something, the more and more you have those battle wounds. And sometimes it can cloud your judgment. So I just wanted to point that out there. Young me over at the Mayakoba Classic there did a good decision starting Brendan Todd when a lot of people didn't want to, even though he fit the course perfectly. Next up, we have Russell Knox, who was probably the least exceptional play of the bunch here. Obviously, he was the lowest scoring out of the bunch in this lineup. He was also somebody I didn't really go over the field on. I didn't think he was a great play that week. He was somebody who was really good in windy conditions, though. Had won a golf tournament when it was crazy windy. I forget the name of that golf tournament. It was recently. It was like 2 months ago. Either way, Russell Knox, though, I wasn't thrilled about him that week. He was coming in right around 10% ownership, so I ended up matching the field. There's certain guys down low that I just matched the field on just because you guys need to spread them out a little bit. You can't play all the same value guys down low, especially if you're being a little bit more concentrated up top. So he was just a filler option for me that ended up getting the job done. There were 10 to 20 guys I could have played over Russell Knox that would have performed better. My lineup was far from optimal that week. I didn't need an optimal lineup to take down that GPP. Russell Knox just kind of ended up being there. But when it came to Tom Hoge, he was that 2%, special leverage option that I was talking about before. The kind of guy that can completely make your DFS lineup work. Can help you take down a magical GPP like I was able to that week. And it wasn't like I thought Tom Hoge was going to go out and do what he did. Finish third, put up sub 70 performances in every round, no bogeys, that kind of stuff. I didn't expect that. But he was a very volatile player, somebody that is good with his irons, is good off the tee pretty much every time he tees it up. He's typically a horrible putter. Whenever he clicks with a putter, whenever he gains a stroke or two, he ends up contending, ends up almost taking down golf tournaments. That's exactly what happened with Tom Hoge. And a lot of people don't like playing guys like that. They're not willing to take risks on people that are volatile. They're not willing to eat that, $25 to $30 of their lineups when he misses a cut like he usually does. A few weeks ago at the 3M Open, Cameron Champ was that guy. He was coming with little to no form. He, didn't really fit the course well. He's a sprayer off the tee, but he went out and won the 3M Open. Every once in a while, you're going to get a ceiling performance even when it doesn't make any sense. And to win a GPP, you have to capture that upside. I think that's the biggest blind spot when it comes to 99.99% of GPP players is they aren't willing to take on risk to reap their proper reward. To win in a GPP, to be a profitable DFS player long term, you have to be willing to lose. You have to be willing to, burn lineups with some of these people. You have to play, people that make no sense essentially week to week to get this done. And I don't mean playing like 20-30% of Tom Hoagie or anything like that. I had him in 4 lineups that week. Just 4, right? So there's a lot of luck involved with making sure that one of those 4 lineups also has the other 5 guys that you need. So you definitely have to take shots down low. You definitely have to be willing to play people that no one else is willing to play. And to make sure that you can take advantage of when you get somebody like that, right? You also have to be concentrated enough on the guys that you really like, the people further up the board that you really like that week, that are going to finish top 10 or top 20 that week. You need to be very convicted and play a lot of them in your lineups. If you're not very concentrated, if you spread out your lineups too much, even if you get somebody right like Tom Hoagie, goes out, has the tournament of his life, you're not going to reap the benefit from it. You have to get that combination right. And again, I think that's a huge blind spot of a lot of DFS players. As a whole, the lineup definitely didn't scream safety by any means. If I saw the lineup before the week, I probably would have tried to change it on my DraftKings lineups. And I think there's something to be said for that. You have to be willing to play uncomfortable lineups to take down GPPs. And my ideology was to either play people that had a skill set to take on the course. Hovland definitely fit that bill. So did Griot and Brendan Todd. Provided ownership leverage. That was Griot. That was also Russell Knox to some extent. And of course, Tom Hoagie. 3 had good course history. It's also Griot and Todd. Or 4 were just absolute flyer plays. Sometimes you just have to be willing to take a risk in a GPP to end up winning all the money. Being narrow-minded and correlating lineups too much just isn't productive. If you're going out there not being holistic with your process, just playing all guys that are extremely good at ball striking, that's actually a very, very small chance of coming through. I see a lot of people that think that taking down DFS tournaments is just being super correlated, going and just playing all the best ball striking guys, all the guys that are the best putters, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And it is hardly ever the case. If you guys have played around a golf, you guys know how volatile it is. The ball can bounce left or right. It can cause 1 to 2 shot swings. And to say that statistics can be that accurate time after time, it just isn't the case. You have to be more holistic with your process. You have to implement all the elements at play, not just one at a time. So now to get an idea of how I set myself up for success, we don't have to look very far. Like I mentioned in the introduction, I had a blog where I started writing about every golf tournament, all the players in the field, some of my favorite plays for DraftKings, just about over a year and a half ago on my written blog. So we have access to that. It's still up to this day. I'm going to have it on the screen here for you guys to see. But I implement a very similar strategy then as to what I do now for my normal golf analysis. I characterize a golf course by using correlation analysis. I try to take everyone's shots gained metrics, correlate that to how people have finished over the years. And the more years, the more events, the more iterations that we have, the more accurate it is. Golf tournaments where it's extremely long, we see correlations to driving distance. Courses with very small greens, we see correlations to around the green, and obviously we try to make sense of the data as it pours out to us. On top of using that type of characterization strategy, I obviously take a look at some of the players' course fit. I try to look at their historical skill set. I try to look at their recent form, their trajectory of their career, whether they're getting older, younger, all that kind of stuff. There's quite a few factors that go into my modeling, and even at that point we're in my modeling, and that's what I tried to show with my blog. I tried to write about some of the findings that I was getting out of that type of analysis. I also tried to give you guys an idea of what I was implementing into my custom modeling. So you guys can see there on the screen my analysis, but to give you guys the short, I was very much numbers oriented, right? So I wrote up a review about the wind at times. The wind is a huge narrative at the Mayakoba Classic. It typically blows in around 20 to 25 mile an hour range, and obviously that has a huge impact on a player's play. What we've seen over the years is at windy events, places where wind typically has an effect on play, ball strikers come out on top. Obviously, you can talk about flighting golf balls. The better iron players obviously have more control over flighting their irons. Perhaps that's why it's the case. For me, it was just numbers based, right? The guys that did better in the wind were the iron players. So I didn't look too much into it. Nowadays, I'd be able to explain the narrative a little bit more. But that time didn't really matter to me. On top of that, we were looking at very flat greens. It's a resort style golf course. That's something that a lot of the players were talking about. Putts hardly ever moved. If they did, it was just in one unilateral direction. You weren't having double breakers or anything like that. You also had really simple pitch shots. The greens weren't elevated; they were flat. They also, didn't have much undulation on them. So hidden pitch shots, putting a lot of spin on them was relatively easy to do, and you really saw that with the scoring that week. And you saw that with my blog as well. I talked about birdie or better percentage. I talked about some of the wind players coming through, and I talked about around the green being de-emphasized. I think that was a huge factor that week. Victor Hovland is a self-proclaimed horrible chipper of the golf ball, so it wasn't surprising to see him take down that golf tournament. It's reassuring to see that the math came through here with my correlation modeling over the years, even though there hasn't been that much course experience at the Mayakoba Classic. The custom modeling was still able to come through. If you're mathematically oriented, I highly suggest that you start modeling yourself. A lot of the value that comes out of modeling is when you do it by yourself and don't rely on other people's data. When you're using other people's modeling, information from other sources, it can be a shortcut, but it's also a shortcut to less success. They're going to be implementing that same kind of data, probably even more effective than you because they made the data, they understand it better than you. So why should you be using data that they've constructed? Why should you be using their ideas? You want to be thinking in your own thought process, on your own laterals, and there's a lot of value that comes with that. Obviously, I've tried to give you guys some of my thought process in this video because I think learning from others can always be beneficial. But I'm also going to have a book coming out on this. It's something I've been working on for quite some time now. I've been going through some edits for the last few months. But it's a comprehensive book on DFS strategy where I pretty much give my thoughts on every part of DFS. Obviously, in this video, I just gave you guys some of the niches, some of the techniques I use for golf analysis, and a very top end level. It'd take me hours and hours and quite honestly weeks to go over my golf analysis and what I do even just for one golf tournament. But in this book, you really get a dive into my thought process, into how I make my custom model specifically. I talk about how you can make your own custom models, how you can use them to benefit your own life, whether it's in DFS, obviously, or even outside DFS, just for whether it's nutritional intake, finances, stocks, crypto, all that kind of stuff. So look forward to that. That's going to be coming out in the next few months. I'm also going to have even more strategy videos coming out as well. I'm going to have videos covering my NBA wins, the 100K and 50K win. We're also going to be covering ownership. We're going to be covering daily fantasy sports 101 because I see far too many people out there going like, what's chalk mean? What does it mean? How many players you use in your player pool? What lineup optimizer do you use? Where do you get your golf statistics? Like all that kind of stuff. I want to make sure I can get that out for you guys. We're going to go over daily fantasy sports 101, so there's no questions, no gaps in your game at all, and even more strategy videos as well. So look forward to all of that. If you're looking for direct access to my custom models, though, if you want to see how I take on daily fantasy sports, look no further than my Patreon page. Right now, I have my PGA Tour Patreon page up where I give my projections for all players in all PGA Tour fields. I give you access to my model rankings, of course, my projected points, my ownership rankings, as well as some of my game theory and notes as well. On top of having direct access to the data, you also get access to me to ask me any questions you guys have for your DFS lineups. I also have sit downs once a week where I help you guys out with your strategy, go over any questions that you guys have, and really give you guys as much value as humanly possible. It's only $1 to join for the month. I made it as cheap as possible. I'm trying to give you guys an idea of the kind of value I have to offer before next golf season. I'm going to be raising the price for next golf season. There's going to be even more tools coming out, but take advantage now while it's super cheap, and link is in the description for you guys.